All right, today we are diving deep into a really special one. H.P. Lovecraft's only full-length novel, The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. Now, this isn't your typical Lovecraft story. It starts out feeling like this really grounded historical mystery, but trust me, it spirals down into some serious cosmic horror.
So at the very center of this whole thing is a question that's just deeply unsettling. We're actually going to start this story at the end. Picture this, a brilliant young man, a promising scholar, who has just had a complete and totally bizarre mental collapse. The whole point of our explainer today is to play detective and figure out what in the world happened to Charles Dexter Ward.
So let's start our investigation with the man himself, Charles Ward. We're going to trace the really strange chain of events that led to him being locked away from the entire world.
See, Charles Ward wasn't just some random guy. He was this brilliant antiquarian, a real history buff, who was just completely fascinated by the past of his hometown, Providence, Rhode Island. But that passion, it soured. It turned into this dark, all-consuming obsession that led to this massive personality shift, and eventually him being committed to an asylum. And the change in him, it was so drastic, so fundamental, that no doctor could come up with a simple medical explanation for it. Something was very, very wrong.
And the way Lovecraft tells this story, well, it's just like a puzzle. The whole narrative is pieced together from letters, from diaries, from old historical documents. It basically turns us into the detectives, right? We're following this trail of breadcrumbs, trying to figure out how he went so completely off the rails.
Okay, so let's start digging, because it turns out every single one of those breadcrumbs leads back, way back into the past, and they all point to one single shadowy figure who casts this long, dark shadow over the entire Ward family.
So who's going to guide us through this maze? That would be the family doctor, a guy named Marinus Willett. Now, Willett is a man of science, a man of reason. But the deeper he gets into Ward's life, the more he finds himself bumping up against things that, well, that science just can't explain. And his whole investigation kicks off by looking into the one person Ward was obsessed with, a man named Joseph Curwen.
So you've got this incredible contrast, right? On one hand, you have Charles Ward, the modern, 20th century scholar, just driven by pure intellectual curiosity. And on the other hand, you have his ancestor, Joseph Curwen, an 18th century merchant who people whispered was a sorcerer, driven by this insane desire to conquer death itself. We're not just talking about a family resemblance here. This is a full-on collision of two completely different worlds.
So let's talk about this Joseph Curwen guy. His history is like this long, dark stain on the city of Providence. He shows up way back in 1692, basically on the run from the Salem witch trials. He gets rich, builds this huge shipping business, but the rumors just won't stop. People whisper about strange shipments coming in at night, about folks going missing, and about how Curwen just doesn't seem to age. The fear just builds and builds until 1771, when a bunch of the town's bigwigs get together and raid his farmhouse. And what they find there is so unbelievably horrific, they basically try to scrub his entire existence from the history books.
So the big question is, what was Curwen actually doing that was so terrifying? That's the exact question Charles Dexter Ward becomes completely obsessed with answering, and you guessed it, that obsession is the key to his entire downfall.
Yeah, Curwen wasn't just messing around with the occult. He was a master. We're talking about necromancy, raising the dead to steal their secrets. We're talking alchemy, but not to make gold. No, his goal was to beat death itself. And all of it, every last bit, was tied to forbidden books like the Necronomicon and summoning these vast, ancient cosmic beings like Yog-Sothoth. The guy was tapping into powers that were way, way beyond what any human should ever mess with.
And right at the heart of all this dark magic was this one key concept, something he called the essential saltus. Now, this wasn't just about, chatting with ghosts. Curwen literally believed he could distill the essence of a dead person into a special powder. And then, with the right magic words, he could use those salts to bring them back, not as spirits, but as physical beings he could question and control. Creepy, right?
And it's right about here that the story takes a hard turn. We leave the dusty historical mystery behind and plunge headfirst into pure horror. Because now, Dr. Willett isn't just in libraries anymore. He's breaking into places that have been sealed up for over 100 years, and the atmosphere, as one critic so perfectly put it, becomes thick with dread.
Willett's investigation eventually leads him to the one place he needs to go, Curwen's old farmhouse, the exact spot of that infamous raid back in 1771. And what he finds lurking in the darkness beneath that house? Well, it confirms the town's absolute worst fears.
Because beneath that farmhouse isn't just a cellar. Oh no, it's a massive man-made labyrinth of catacombs. This was it. This was the secret heart of Curwen's entire operation, a hidden laboratory of unspeakable experiments and unbelievable cruelty.
And down in those catacombs, that's where Willett finds Curwen's test subjects. These things, they weren't quite human anymore. They were the botched jobs, the failed results of his necromancy. Half-formed, monstrous creatures that Curwen had raised but couldn't quite get right, so he just kept them penned up in pits like livestock. It is literally a scene from a nightmare.
Okay, so Willett pushes deeper into the darkness and finds Curwen's inner sanctum, his personal lab. And there it is, a pile of those essential salts, just sitting there untouched since 1771. He sees a scroll nearby with a strange incantation written in Latin, and, caught between sheer terror and his own scientific curiosity, he reads the words aloud. Big mistake, because something answers him. Some ancient, powerful consciousness is pulled into the room, and the terror of it, the sheer alien presence, is so overwhelming that Dr. Willett, this calm, rational man of science, just faints dead away.
When Willett finally comes to, it's like a lightning bolt. Suddenly, all the pieces of this insane puzzle, Ward's madness, the old historical records, the monsters in the catacombs, it all snaps into place. And the truth it reveals is more monstrous than anything he could have possibly imagined.
Charles Dexter Ward didn't just summon his ancestor's spirit. He had brought him back, fully. Using the essential salts he painstakingly recovered, Ward resurrected the 18th century sorcerer. And here's the ultimate terrifying twist. The person in the asylum? It isn't Charles Dexter Ward. It's Joseph Curwen. After Ward brought him back from the dead, Curwen murdered his own descendant and just took his place. They looked alike enough to pull it off. And his goal? To use all the advantages of the modern 20th century to continue his diabolical experiments right where he left off over 150 years ago.
So when all is said and done, what's the big takeaway from this horrifying tale? What's the dark legacy that Ward's obsession left behind?
Well, this story is really a warning on so many different levels. For one, it's a classic tale about forbidden knowledge, right? That digging into things you're not meant to know only leads to destruction. It's also about how the past is never really gone, how the evil that people do can literally come back to haunt their descendants. And maybe the creepiest theme of all is this idea of transmigration, the thought that your identity, your very soul, might not even be safe inside your own body. And that's really the final, chilling thought Lovecraft leaves us with. See, Charles Ward thought he was just studying history, but what he was really doing was unlocking a cage. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If an evil from 150 years ago can be brought back that easily, what other, much older horrors are just lying dormant out there, waiting for someone to come along and whisper their name?